Hi, Connor. How are you? How are you doing?
Good. Good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really happy to be here with you today. I always enjoy your company, and it's so nice to see you. I spent the bulk of my day so far talking with people from different backgrounds, mostly people of color, and just been learning so much. And getting involved in deeper conversations that I don't think people these days feel they can have, know how to have, and necessarily don't take the time to have them either. So thank you for joining me in this conversation today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I met you through music. You and I did a show together to raise money for education, for music education for students in
Right.
low-income communities. And you are such a brilliantly talented pianist, and you have a beautiful voice as well. I know you haven't always sang though. When you were 11, you wrote a song and you were on CNN for a song you composed.
Yeah, that was right during the September 11th tragedy that happened.
And what was your song called again?
Lady Liberty. Well, I'd written the piece. I don't know how it got that title. That sort of manifested itself, I think. It wasn't something I really had planned to really share with anyone, but I was a part of the World Piano Competition, and they had a recital that fall, like immediately following the events. And I think in their marketing of the events for the competition, they also, brought that to light. And that's kind of how it ended up with the feature on CNN.
Pretty amazing. Was there a lot of pressure in your life at that time, or was it just exciting?
Although there was a lot of pressure. Yeah, playing competitively was a lot of pressure. Not to say it wasn't exciting as well,
And it
but
was a composition you had written at the age of 11, right? That's
yeah,
that's kind of unique, don't you think? Would you say you're a virtuoso? You've been called a virtuoso?
I've never considered myself a virtuoso. I think I usually beat myself up no matter when I play, how I play. First thing I think about is what I did wrong, what I could do better.
The artist's heart, I guess, as it were.
Yeah.
So you are a Navajo artist.
Yes.
Native American artist from the Navajo tribe. And did you grow up in the Navajo tribe?
I grew up in northern Arizona in a town called Page, which is right on the border of the Navajo Nation. So I spent my time there, and my grandpa has a place still on the reservation. They're very close. They're right next to each other. So.
And your grandfather, I did want to talk about this too, but he's also an artist, right? He was a songwriter.
Yeah, he's a medicine man, and he's a singer. He performs traditional songs, and he also does ceremonies and prayers and things like that. And music is a big part of that. So yeah.
Amazing. I can only, so I have so many questions actually. So I'm very curious about, I guess, because today's goal is to have these hard conversations about, oppression and challenges you probably faced in life. And then how, I want people to hear how a wonderful human being has these things thrown at them. And then of course, how they deal with it, and maybe guidance they could give to those of us who are ignorant or unaware of how life is happening. But so if you grew up next to the Navajo Nation, but you grew up in was it a predominantly white area, going to a U.S. school as opposed to a school in the nation? Is it nation or reserve or?
The reservation.
Reservation.
Yeah. There were a lot of other Navajo students. It's a border town, and there were a lot that came in that took the bus from the reservation nearby to go to school. A lot of times that was the closest school. So yeah, it was a very diverse group of classmates for the most part.
Was it an inclusive opportunity, or were you facing racism and oppression due to your skin color and your cultural background?
Yes, especially, well, I kind of got some prejudice from both sides because I'm biracial, And, on my father's side of Navajo, and my mom is white. And so I grew up with more like in the Navajo culture, and, I grew up around the language, and with my grandfather being a medicine man and really knowing that part of the culture. But there were certainly times when people were saying that I was too white, or, the opposite. I was sort of that weird middle ground where I guess I could get it from both sides, I guess you could say.
I'm always
Yeah.
quite surprised to hear, and that's one thing I'm learning more so in the last 4 or 5 years, is I've been studying. I guess I've been studying racism and just wanting to have conversations with people about their backgrounds and learning. I used to not ask about people's backgrounds because I didn't think it was polite. Mm-hmm. And then I realized it was important that I have these conversations. And what I came to learn was I was missing out on so many amazing things about people and embracing the diversity and different things because I wasn't asking, meeting someone who had dark skin and just assuming they were like, from a certain part of the world, but finding out they're actually from 2 different parts of the world that have come together. And,
mm-hmm.
The cultural amazing thing. I can't imagine how powerful and amazing it was to grow up with a medicine man as your grandfather. I think that's just, you must have such deep knowledge about the world and the earth. You might not even realize you have, that so many people are walking around clueless of. Because I mean, my understanding of the First Nations, Indigenous people and their approach to medicine is very earth-based, right? It's very spirit-based, very.
It is, yes.
In touch with our planet. I think that's amazing and fascinating. Did any of it resonate with you in a way that you still lean towards in the way you handle your life?
Yeah, definitely. I think that the medicinal part is also just a part of how you live your life, traditionally how you live your life. It's all about balance, and any kind of an ailment or sickness is usually it comes from an imbalance somewhere. And so the prayers and the ceremonies that they might do are just about correcting that imbalance and bringing things back to where they should be. You know what I mean? And I think when I was younger, I maybe took it for granted. I didn't realize, especially the area that I was at, right, on the reservation and right next to the reservation, having my grandfather being a medicine man, I didn't realize how unique that was until I left Arizona and moved to Cincinnati when I was about 10 years old. And then I realized that it was totally different from everybody else that I met, all my other classmates. And the more I grew, the older I got, the more I came to treasure the things that I learned and experienced and that I have in my family.
I know that you put out a record last year on your own label that was with your grandfather, right? And some of the old traditional songs.
Yes.
Amazing.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to put together, and when I create music too, it's also a learning experience for me because I dive deeper into the culture myself, and it starts from a place of things that I knew already, and then I go deeper and discover more things. I mean, there's so much to know and so much information and so much in the belief that I'm constantly learning still today.
It's funny, I heard myself wanting to let the people know that even though your traditions and your cultural background inform your music, that your music isn't specifically Native First Nations music. But then I thought, well, I think that's an implicit bias in my mind, wanting your music to succeed. And so therefore I shouldn't let people know that it's different than white music, which I'm learning to catch myself on these things, because you write pop songs, you write beautiful, pop songs, and like, your compositions are so moving. Like you can go from it, like what do you call them? Acts or passages, or what's it called when you go from one, like in a song, in a composition, one sound to a different sound,
Yeah.
When you do that, it's your through line remains, but the feeling and the tempo and the story you're telling, you're very gifted in my books. Am I?
Thank you.
Yeah. So you moved to Cincinnati, and then the school you were in there, was that very diverse, or did you face racism because you look different?
It was diverse in a different way than where I was from. You know, there were no other Native American students that I really met along the way, or many people who even really knew about it or knew about the culture. So there was definitely times I just faced people that were ignorant to Indigenous people and issues and culture altogether.
Did your culture get washed away a little bit?
I think so. I mean, I did my best to keep up the things that were just a part of my life that I was used to growing up. But it was definitely a totally different vibe altogether, because I went from a really small town, Page, Arizona is like a really small town. It's getting bigger now, but still small. And went to Cincinnati, which was just the total opposite of it.
Right.
So that was just a culture shock altogether, all other things aside.
Yeah. And then you also, it is Pride Month, and so I'd like to proudly let people know that you're gay. And when did you come out? Did you always know you were gay, and when did you come out?
I can't really remember a time that I like came out. It wasn't something that always even came up or that I talked about. And I definitely, that was a part of my life that I didn't share. And that was very purposeful because I knew the backlash and everything. But I also, as I went on, it was just kind of like I started to just be myself, more open. And, if people asked about it or it came up, I just stopped hiding it. I don't think there was ever a time that I really just came out, or even with my parents, you know what I mean, sat down like we need to have the conversation.
Right.
Yeah.
You just were gay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that's part of I think, probably almost 2 decades younger than me, maybe almost. And so I wonder if that's like a generational thing where, in my generation, you had to come out. That was the way you were able to start living that truth, is you had to tell people, and then, deal with other people's opinions on it, which is just ridiculous to me. And that I think it's great that as time's moving on, you can just be who you are.
Yeah, and I think like my circle of friends, and I went to a performing arts school, so
Okay.
that it was a much more accepting community to begin with.
Yeah.
So it was not so much of a big deal for my circle of friends that I already had.
It was more liberal leaning, liberal arts, creativity, and being true to yourself, because that's what artists, that's the job, right?
Right.
My job is to heal out loud. That's what I kind of think my thing is. And you also went to Standing Rock when that was happening. And how long were you there? You went for
we were there for a week.
Yeah.
It was the week of Thanksgiving that we went. Yeah.
Really powerful and hard times. Do you think, is there similarities you find to what's happening now in the protesting and the fighting back to Black Lives Matter and systematic racism as you probably encountered, when
Definitely.
you were in
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A lot of the same issues, a lot of the same rhetoric, I think, being tossed back, in opposition to any protesting, and the racism, the police brutality that we experienced, and also the violence we experienced just from the private companies and forces that they had hired, because it wasn't just the police, it was also private their privatized security teams that they brought in that were militarized, and it was a lot of the same issues.
And literally, I mean, if like legally standing, it was native land, right? So just because these corporations had access to that land for their own product, they didn't really have any rights to be, let alone to fight you, but to like be physically dominant in that situation, to be physically aggressive.
Yeah, I don't think that's even anything that's really crossed their mind. I mean, indigenous land rights is such a concept that's from the colonizers, you know? So they're the ones that decided what was our land to begin with after they took what they needed and put us where they wanted to put us. And so they're calling the shots on that to begin with. So they had no problem when they needed it for whatever, you know, to build their pipelines and something profitable, then they can just change the rules.
Right. Well, that's in Canada, I would say that that's our biggest, the racism. I think the biggest issue we have in our country is against the First Nations, and definitely, you know, what our prime minister started putting into work, when I'm not sure if it's moving fast enough necessarily even, but he's working on reparations. And, you know, my hope is, and this is what these conversations are about too in my mind, is, you know, how do my children stop being told they are responsible for the land that was stolen by their, you know, grandparents, of the people who lived on the land first? How is that creating communication and healing? And so one of the things they're starting to do is weaving blankets and having the children from the reservation and the schools come together to build creative art projects together. And I feel like it's so hard. How do we apologize? How do we make it better? You know, like what can actively be done to help heal that shit that went down, you know, the divide.
Yeah.
So,
you know, art, culture, and understanding, education, those are all steps in the right direction. And conversations like this, because, you know, even though I've experienced definitely outward racism or homophobia or just hateful things, a lot of what I experienced are the microaggressions from people who aren't meaning to be hateful or aren't meaning to be hurtful, but who it's just so casually built into the culture that they don't even realize what they've said is wrong. And it's hard to have a conversation with someone like that because you don't want them to feel like they're being attacked, you know?
yeah.
For example, after a concert, and this has happened many times, where people have come up and they just said, wow, that was so amazing. You play so well for an Indian. I'm just so impressed. And it's like, wow, how do we have this conversation right now in this setting, you know? And they didn't mean anything. You know, they weren't coming up. They really thought they were coming up to say something nice and encouraging to me. And then they say that, and it's like, well, that was just totally missing the point here.
Yeah.
You know, and creating an environment where we can have that conversation, where I can talk to someone and be like, look, that was, you know, really not right. And here's why.
Yeah.
Just from an educational point of view. And now that more conversations are happening, it's a little bit easier to start that flow, that education, without it having to be sort of butting heads or aggressive or defensive or anything like that.
I said to, I've had a couple things where turns of phrase, I'll say them without realizing the history behind them. Mm-hmm. And I've been corrected, and immediately it's like, oh, well, thank you for correcting me. But I know that a younger version of me who was ignorant to systematic racism and to my white privilege even, and then thusly the white fragility I had, would have been defensive, like, well, I didn't mean that, you know, or I'm sorry, or whatever. That was so Canadian of me there, but I even said it with an O, sorry. But I just, like, I used the term jerry rig recently, and it's got a racist beginning to it. And I don't even know what it was, but I was caught, and they were like, no, and I was like, oh, well, I will be sure now to use the term MacGyver, you know, or something better, because there's no intention. I think a lot of white people are struggling with right now is the intention is not to hurt or to oppress. So if we could just step aside for a second and recognize that that's not our intention, and take the opportunity to learn as opposed
Yes.
to defending, well, I didn't mean to hurt you, so don't be hurt. It's like,
Right.
oh shit, that was wrong. Okay, I'm learning. And I think a lot of people's core is being really shaken right now because they are not ill-intended, but the
Mm-hmm.
ignorance of the system in place are just, they've set them up to fail. But heck, what an opportunity to learn. I know I'm babbling right now, but are you going on? But I think it's such an incredible time to be alive, as hard as it is. The fact that we get to be a part of where the world is going, Connor, I think it's just
Right.
such a opportunity, a challenge, but an opportunity. So, well, okay, your turn. You talk.
Well, like I said, I think it's important, and it's definitely going to come from education and from educating each other and sharing the culture, and you see that there are many beautiful differences and a lot of things that are just the same too.
Right.
um, and you know, environments can be hostile sometimes, and like I said, if these issues come up with me at the end of a concert or something, you know, there's not always a place for me to have this conversation right then and there, you
Right.
know. But the more that there are uh, platforms to discuss these things in a healthy way, the more that scenario is not going to happen in the first place, and nobody's going to be put in that hard place to start with.
Because they're learning just from watching other people learn, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One of the people I spoke with today, her name's Nicole Lear, and she's an actor, director, writer, producer, and she has been taking on such the heavy burden of educating. And one of the things that she's been focusing on is, instead of the hateful words or the ignorance, connecting with the human being underneath it. And sometimes she's really got to search for that one thing, you know, oh, I like the picture of your cat or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
She's taking it on herself to just kind of guide instead of fight. And I think that must be such a challenge to face every time someone is so ignorant and the microaggressions are so present.
Mm-hmm.
How do I make them feel better so that they actually are open to changing,
Right.
as opposed to defending myself even though they've hurt me? And the constant having to rise above must be a lot of work all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's definitely something that, you know, people can help with, regardless if you're a person of color or not, or if you're a part of a minority or not. Those that can speak to each other, you know, my other friends that I have that are white, that also take it the next step, not just in educating themselves, but reaching out to other people. Because it does get very, you know, for me, sometimes I don't even want to get on Facebook because I know there's going to be all of this stuff that I'm like, oh, it's exhausting having these conversations, especially when they get nasty. And I try to, you know, I can't just be nasty because that's counterproductive. And it is very draining. So it is nice when I have other friends who can step in and sort of say the things, you know, that need to be said in a constructive and helpful way. You know, I tell them all the time, like, I appreciate that so much. Because like I said, it's draining, it's exhausting, and it can create anxiety and all these other things apart from the actual racism or microaggressions and all of that. It's just the burden of, you have to not only endure that, but you have this responsibility to educate so that people know. So the more that is handled, especially by people who are not, like I said, people in a minority group or people of color, like my white friends that can speak to their family members and have those conversations, it makes a huge difference.
that's wonderful. That's good, because I think people, you know, like I've seen what's happening around the world, and I want to be an ally and a facilitator of change, but I didn't know how or what to do. So then I realized, you know, I have people that tune into what I post, and maybe introducing them to new people who are different than them would be the way to go. But I think so many people who are allies and comrades don't know what to do. So it's good to know that for you, just having an ally to speak up on your behalf really helps lift the weight. You don't have to carry it by yourself.
Yeah, that's 100% true.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I wish I could talk to you all day.
Yeah, oh, we always have good conversations.
Yeah, I know, right? We should grab a MB and a beverage and have a hangout.
Yeah, we need to do that.
I would like that very much. Is there anything else you want to touch base on or say before we say goodbye?
Nothing that comes, nothing comes to mind immediately. Like you said, I could talk all day.
Yeah.
But I think we covered a lot of important issues, and I really appreciate you doing this and having these conversations and sharing it. And I really appreciate it.
I appreciate you hanging out with me, Connor. I know these things aren't easy, and someone come and say, "Hey, you want to spend an hour talking about horrible things that have happened to you?" And yeah, invitation. So thanks for saying yes. Thanks for saying yes. All right. I'll ask if it's okay if people want to post comments and things below, if you'll take the time to answer them if you've got the time.
Absolutely. Yeah, happy to.
Thank you. Okay, Connor, thank you so much. We'll talk to you really soon.
Okay, take care. Thank you.